The mansion was silent, the kind of silence that weighs more than noise. Daniel Vega, a young millionaire who had learned to live with loneliness after losing his wife, was reviewing documents for a new company when a faint sound pulled him out of his concentration. It was a muffled murmur, almost imperceptible, coming from the servants' hallway. As he approached, he found the door slightly open, and there, in the small room where the staff kept cleaning supplies, he saw Elena sitting on the floor, her head in her hands. She wasn't crying loudly, but with that quiet sadness of someone trying to hide their pain so as not to disturb anyone. There was something in that image that made him stop. Maybe because he too had learned to cry in silence. Daniel didn't say anything at first. He just watched. The dim light from the hallway illuminated her tired face, young, yet marked by life. "I'm sorry, sir," she murmured, trying to compose herself. But there was nothing to forgive. What he saw in her wasn't weakness. It was a heart still fighting, despite everything. "What happened to you?" he asked, with a voice he hadn't used in a long time, one that cared about someone else. Elena lifted her eyes, surprised. "I don't want to be a bother, but I don't know how to keep going." That simple confession hit him deeply. It was the same sentence Daniel had repeated countless times in silence, never daring to say it out loud. In that instant, something changed in both of them. Daniel realized that, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't the only one carrying emptiness. And Elena, without knowing it, had just opened the door that would restore humanity to the loneliest man in the city. Daniel Vega was the kind of man who had everything money could buy, but nothing that truly mattered. His home, immense and perfectly organized, reflected the structure of his life. Impeccable on the outside, empty within. He had spent 3 years hiding behind contracts and silence, convinced that pain fades when one stops feeling. But that afternoon, when he saw Elena break down in that small room, something inside him ignited. Elena had arrived only a few weeks earlier, recommended by an agency. No one knew much about her, only that she worked with a dedication bordering on devotion. But behind that strength hid a harsh truth, a life of losses, a sick mother, a dream cut short. Her tears were not for a mistake at work. They were for the invisible burden she carried day after day. And Daniel, without fully understanding why, decided to listen. That moment, so simple, became the starting point for something neither of them expected. What began as an act of compassion would turn into a connection that would change their destinies. Two opposite worlds, one of power and one of necessity, were about to meet on a ground that money could never buy: humanity. If a story has ever reminded you that we all carry invisible wounds, this one is for you. Subscribe, leave your like, and comment which country or city you're watching from. Get ready to discover how an unexpected encounter can heal even the most broken souls. In the following days, Daniel couldn't get that image out of his mind. The young woman sitting on the floor, her gaze lost, her soul in pieces. He tried to convince himself that he shouldn't get involved, that he had hired Elena to clean his house, not to stir up his past. But something about her unsettled him, a kind of silent mirror that forced him to face his own loneliness. That morning, he found her in the kitchen preparing coffee for the staff. Her hands moved carefully, as if every gesture carried a purpose. Daniel watched her from the doorway without saying a word. There was something in her concentration, in her simplicity, that disarmed him. When she noticed his presence, she jumped slightly. "Good morning, sir," she said, trying to smile. "Good morning, Elena. May I join you?" he asked, taking a seat. She hesitated but nodded slightly. It was the first time someone like him, a man used to giving orders, asked permission to sit with an employee. For a long moment, the aroma of coffee filled the air. "That day," Daniel began, "I saw you cry. I didn't want to interrupt, but I've been thinking about it. Are you feeling better now?" Elena lowered her eyes. "It was a hard moment, sir. I don't usually cry in front of anyone." "You don't have to explain," he replied softly. "You just reminded me of something. Something I thought I'd forgotten. There was a silence heavy with meaning. Daniel wasn't a man who shared his past, but for the first time, he felt the need to. I lost my wife 3 years ago, he confessed. Since then, I haven't known how to move forward. Your sadness made me realize I'm not the only one who feels lost. Elena listened without interrupting. Her eyes glistened, not out of pity but empathy. Sometimes life takes away what we love most, she said. But it also gives us new people to remind us there's still something worth fighting for. Daniel looked at her with a mixture of astonishment and gratitude. That young woman, with work-worn hands and eyes full of life, had just spoken the words he'd needed to hear for years. From that day on, his routine changed. He began finding excuses to cross paths with her. A cup of coffee, a question about the garden, a trivial comment. Elena, though shy, always responded kindly. Her voice had a calmness he couldn't find anywhere else. But as the weeks passed, Daniel noticed something else. Every time they spoke, Elena seemed to carry a story she avoided telling. It wasn't just sadness, it was a deep wound, a debt to her past that kept her captive. That night, as he prepared for bed, Daniel realized he couldn't keep being a spectator. He didn't yet know how, but he was determined to help her. What he didn't imagine was that in trying to save her, he would end up healing himself. Curiosity became a quiet constant. Daniel tried to keep his distance, but every conversation with Elena drew him closer to a story he didn't yet know. She wasn't just a maid. There was a strength in her that defied her fragile appearance. He wanted to understand where she came from, what she had left behind, what had shaped that calm sadness in her eyes. One day, while they were reviewing the pantry inventory, Daniel noticed a tremor in her hands. "Are you all right?" he asked. Elena nodded, though her eyes betrayed her. "Just a little dizzy." "I didn't sleep much last night," she said, brushing it off. But he knew there was more. Something was quietly consuming her. That afternoon, he decided to speak with Rosa, the housekeeper he trusted most. "Do you know anything about the new girl?" he asked cautiously. Rosa looked at him with a mix of respect and warning. "Only that she's been through hard times. She lost her mother last year and quit school to take care of her little brother. When I met her, she barely ate." Those words shook him. Daniel thought about how many times he'd seen suffering without really looking at it. That night, during dinner, Elena tried to hide her exhaustion, but her hands trembled. "Elena, if you need help," he began. She interrupted him with a weak smile. "Thank you, sir, but some battles must be fought in silence." That phrase haunted him all the next day. In his office, surrounded by numbers and contracts, Daniel felt empty again. He, too, had fought in silence, refusing to admit his life had stopped the day he lost his wife. But now there was someone who, without meaning to, reminded him that moving forward was still possible. One afternoon, as he reviewed documents, he found Elena in the garden, talking on the phone. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her desperate tone stopped him cold. "I don't have the money, but I'll do whatever it takes, do you hear me? I just need a little more time." Daniel froze. When she hung up, he pretended not to have heard and approached. "Everything okay?" he asked. Elena smiled faintly. "Yes, everything's fine." But he already knew she was lying. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing the fear behind her words, feeling the weight she carried alone. At dawn, he made up his mind. He spoke with his administrator to review the staff's wages. When he saw the numbers, he felt ashamed. It was barely enough to survive. He, with all his wealth, had overlooked the humanity of those around him. The next morning, he called her into his office. Elena arrived nervous, thinking she had done something wrong. But Daniel handed her an envelope. "It's an advance," he said. "I don't want you to lack anything while you work here." She refused at first, but he insisted. "It's not charity, it's justice." Elena looked at him with tears she tried to hold back. "Thank you, sir. No one's ever done something like this for me." Daniel gave a faint smile. "Maybe it's time someone did," he replied. At that moment, something began to blossom between them. A fragile but real trust, born from respect and compassion. The days began to pass with a different calm. Daniel noticed that the house, once cold and silent, now had a new rhythm. Elena would hum softly as she cleaned, and her laughter, gentle, shy, almost afraid, flowed through the hallways like a ray of light. It was the first time in a long while that Daniel felt his home breathe again. One morning, he woke earlier than usual and went down to the kitchen. He found her preparing breakfast for the staff. "I didn't know you could cook so well," he said, tasting a piece of bread. Elena blushed. "I learned out of necessity, not talent," she replied humbly. "Sometimes necessity teaches better than any school," Daniel answered with a smile. As the weeks went by, the distance between them began to fade. They were no longer Mr. Vega and the maid. They were two people sharing silence, learning to listen to one another. Elena began to speak more. She shared small anecdotes from her childhood, how she once dreamed of becoming a nurse before life forced her to work instead. Daniel listened attentively, fascinated by her ability to laugh at pain. "Have you ever thought about going back to school?" he asked one day. "Sometimes," she answered. "But there are responsibilities that don't allow you to dream too much. I have a younger brother, and as long as he needs me, I can't think about myself." Those words stuck in Daniel's mind. That same afternoon, he called his lawyer and began the process of creating an anonymous scholarship for her. He didn't want her to know. He just wanted her to one day have the opportunity no one had given her. That night, however, something changed. Elena fainted while clearing the table. Daniel rushed to her side, catching her before she hit the floor. He immediately called the family doctor. "She's exhausted," the doctor said. "She needs rest, proper meals, and to stop working so many hours." Daniel felt guilty. He hadn't realized how much she was pushing herself. The next day, he ordered that she not perform any heavy tasks and gave her the day off, but Elena refused. "I can't sit still, sir. If I stop, I think too much." "Then stay," he said gently, "but come with me to the garden." They spent hours walking among the rose bushes. For the first time, they talked without fear. Daniel told her how he had lost his wife in an accident and how, ever since, he had lived with silent guilt. Elena listened, tears welling in her eyes. "It wasn't your fault," she said firmly. "Sometimes fate doesn't ask. It just takes." Her words were a balm. Daniel felt something he hadn't in years: peace. And Elena, seeing him open his heart, realized she wasn't alone. There was someone who understood her pain without judgment. When the sun began to set, Daniel made a silent decision. He would do everything in his power to restore Elena's hope, even if it meant facing his own past. What he didn't yet know was that the gesture, born from the purest form of love, was about to change both of their lives forever. A few weeks had passed since that walk in the garden, and something in their dynamic had shifted. Elena seemed calmer, and Daniel, without realizing it, had started to wait for her every morning, as if her presence softened the weight of his days. They didn't speak of what had happened, but both knew that something invisible connected them. One afternoon, as Daniel signed documents in his office, there was a soft knock at the door. "May I come in?" Elena asked shyly. She held a wrinkled, ink-stained letter in her hand. "Of course," he replied, standing up. "What's wrong?" She took a deep breath before speaking. "I just got a call from the hospital where my mother used to be treated. They can't continue my brother's therapy because we haven't paid the overdue fees." Her voice broke. "I'm not asking you for money, sir. Just another advance on my salary. I swear I'll pay it back." Daniel looked at her in silence. A sharp ache rose in his chest, not out of pity, but from deep understanding. He knew the pain of not being able to protect those you love. He walked to his desk and, without saying a word, wrote a check. "This isn't an advance," he said as he handed it to her. "Consider it a promise. No one working for me should ever go hungry." Elena trembled as she accepted it. "I can't take this." "Yes, you can," he said firmly. "This isn't about money, Elena. It's about dignity. And you've earned it through your honest work every single day." That night, when she returned to her small apartment, Elena hugged her brother with tears of relief. For the first time in months, They could eat dinner without fear of what tomorrow might bring. Someday I'll repay him, she thought, never imagining that that act of kindness would soon change everything. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. Daniel's generosity moved her, but it also scared her. She wasn't used to receiving without giving something in return. In her mind, help always came with a hidden price. But there was something different about him. His gaze asked for nothing, only offered understanding. For the first time, someone saw her without judgment. The next day, Daniel waited for her in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee. "How's your brother?" he asked sincerely. "Better," she replied. "Thanks to you, he'll be able to continue his treatment." "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he said. "Sometimes helping someone is the only way to help yourself." His words lingered in the air. Elena looked at him with a mixture of tenderness and curiosity. There was something in his face beyond power or wealth, a quiet sadness, a story still healing. She didn't know it, but that conversation marked the beginning of an unbreakable bond. Later that afternoon, Elena received an envelope with no sender. Inside was a letter from a local foundation. "You have been selected to receive a scholarship in nursing." She froze, her heart racing. She didn't understand how it was possible. She had left school years ago. She ran to Daniel's office to share the news. He listened, hiding a smile. "That's wonderful, Elena. No one deserves it more," he said, pretending to be surprised. "I don't know who could have recommended me," she murmured. "I feel like someone up there is giving me another chance." Daniel only nodded. He had no intention of revealing the truth. The scholarship was his silent way of restoring a bit of justice to her life. Seeing her happiness was enough. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something that truly mattered. In the days that followed, Elena began dividing her time between work and classes. Daniel watched her from afar, proud of her determination. At night, when the house grew quiet, he thought about how much his world had changed since she arrived. His loneliness no longer felt so heavy. His once gray life now had color. But life rarely grants joy without a test. One morning, Elena arrived pale and trembling. Her brother had been rushed to the hospital. Daniel dropped everything and drove her there. They waited for hours in silence. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was serious. "The situation is delicate but stable. He'll need constant care." Elena broke down in tears. Daniel sat beside her, holding her hand. He didn't speak. He just stayed there, sharing her pain. In that simple human gesture, she found a strength she didn't know she had. Days later, when her brother was released, Daniel offered to help with the medical expenses. Elena tried to refuse, but he stopped her. "This isn't pity. It's because I believe in you, and because your fight reminded me that I can still feel." In that moment, she understood something. She wasn't alone. That man, who had lived surrounded by power and emptiness, had given her back her faith in kindness, and she, without meaning to, had given him back the meaning of life. That night, as they walked down the hospital corridor, Daniel looked at her and said softly, "Maybe some encounters aren't coincidences, Elena. Sometimes broken souls find each other to heal." Elena smiled through her tears. "Then maybe destiny knew what it was doing." "Yes," he replied, his voice calm and certain. "Maybe it always did. Neither of them knew it yet. But that silent promise to walk beside each other was the beginning of a new path, one where love, hope, and faith would become the true wealth that money could never buy." The months that followed brought a quiet but profound change. Elena was no longer just an employee. She had become part of the house, part of the air, part of the rhythm that gave meaning to Daniel's days. He, in turn, no longer hid behind the marble walls of his mansion. He began to go out more, laugh more, and take an interest in life again. Everything that had been dormant within him began to awaken. But destiny, which often has its own way of teaching, still held one last lesson. One afternoon, as Elena was returning from the university, a car struck her as she crossed the street. Passers-by rushed to help. Her cell phone fell to the ground, and among the missed calls, one bore Daniel's name. When he received the news, The world stopped again. He rushed to the hospital, heart pounding. Seeing her lying there unconscious on the stretcher brought back the scene that had scarred him years ago, the death of his wife. But this time, he couldn't lose again. Not her. He held Elena's hand and, for the first time in years, prayed. Not for himself, but for someone else. 2 endless days passed. Daniel didn't leave her side. He ignored meetings, calls, obligations. All that mattered was seeing her open her eyes. And when she finally did, a sigh of relief filled the room. "I thought that," he began to say, but she stopped him with a faint smile. "I'm here, sir. I'm alive." A tear slipped down Daniel's cheek. Not of sadness, but of gratitude. "Don't call me sir," he whispered. "Not anymore." In that instant, Elena understood that something in him had changed forever. They didn't speak of love, but love was there. In every look, in every shared silence. Her recovery was slow. Daniel hired the best doctors and rearranged his entire schedule to be there. During the following weeks, he became her constant support, reading to her, cooking for her, even learning to prepare the tea she liked. The staff watched in silence, knowing something stronger than fortune now bound them together. When Elena could finally walk again, she insisted on returning to work. "I don't want to be a burden," she said with determination. Daniel smiled. "You never were. But this time, you'll work with me, not for me. I want you to lead the new foundation project." She looked at him, puzzled. "Foundation?" "Yes," he replied. "In your name, to help young people who had to abandon their studies to care for their families. You've been inspiring me for months without knowing it. I want your story to change other lives, just like it changed mine." Tears streamed down Elena's face. She couldn't believe it. The opportunity she had always dreamed of was right in front of her. "Daniel, I don't know what to say," she murmured, trembling. "Say it with your actions," he replied softly. "Let's keep helping those who haven't yet had their second chance." With time, the foundation grew. Elena finished her studies and became a nurse, while Daniel, far from the big meetings and millionaire contracts, discovered a new kind of wealth: service and empathy. Together they learned that life isn't measured by what you possess, but by what you give. Years passed, and the shine of skyscrapers no longer meant anything to Daniel. Instead, every healed smile, every young person who returned to school thanks to the foundation, became his new measure of success. Elena, now a nurse and director of the project, walked beside him with the same humility as always, but with a new light. The light of someone who had learned that pain, too, can bloom. Their story, born from the silence of a mansion and a young woman's hidden tears, had become a testament to hope. Daniel and Elena never sought love, but love found them the moment they stopped looking back. Their wounds didn't disappear, but they learned to use them as roots for something greater: compassion. On one of the walls of the foundation's main building, a phrase is engraved, written by both of them. "Sometimes life breaks you just to show you what you're made of." Daniel smiles every time he reads it, remembering the day he found his maid crying in silence, not knowing that, in that very moment, he had also found his own salvation.